For centuries, the galactic empires had spread across the stars, building mighty civilizations and conquering worlds one by one. Different species, big and small, joined forces to create vast networks that stretched across the galaxy. But there was always one thing that puzzled them. Every map of the galaxy, no matter who made it, stopped at a certain point, a strange and invisible line. The maps would show world after world, stars and planets, but right at the edge of human space, it would just end. No one dared to cross that boundary. No one even talked about it. It was as if the space beyond it didn't exist, and everyone had agreed to leave it that way. This wasn't just some small detail on a map, something that didn't matter. The boundary was huge, huge enough that the most powerful civilizations of the galaxy never went near it. And the strangest part? No one knew why. It wasn't that humans had put up walls or made threats. No one had ever tried to push into human space. It was something deeper, something more mysterious. No one who had ever crossed that line came back to tell the story. They didn't send a signal, didn't leave a message. It was just silence. The Cathari, one of the oldest and most respected races in the galaxy, were the first to truly try to explore human space. They were a proud species. Their empire stretched across thousands of star systems. They sent out their bravest explorers to chart human territory. But when they reached the boundary of human space, something happened. Their explorers didn't return. There were no distress signals, no final words, just silence. It was as if the very air around human space swallowed them whole. No one understood what had happened, and no one dared to find out. The Cathari never spoke of it again. And the Galactic Council, the group of the most powerful species in the known universe, sat in quiet fear whenever the topic of human space came up. They debated everything, from trade to war to exploration. But no one ever dared to discuss the biggest mystery in the galaxy. The humans themselves were odd, almost like an accident in the universe's plan. They had fought their way to the stars, not through peaceful negotiations or slow advancement, but through wars, bloodshed, and sheer stubbornness. Other species had grown slowly, carefully, through treaties, alliances, and long-term strategies. But humans? They moved like a fire, unpredictable and unstoppable, sweeping across everything in their path. Then, just when they seemed to be on the verge of conquering the stars, they stopped. No more wars, no more expansion. Their colonies didn't grow. Their ships didn't explore. They had drawn an invisible line, and no one dared to cross it. But there was always someone who had to ask why. Someone who had to find out what lay beyond that line, what the humans knew that made the rest of the galaxy so afraid. Ambassador Corinve of the Zixari Dominion had spent his entire career studying the humans. He had read every report, listened to every story, and sensed the fear that ran through the Galactic Council whenever Earth was mentioned. The humans had always been an enigma, fragile yet terrifying, weak yet impossible to defeat. They weren't like the other species who made their homes in the stars. They were something else, something wild. And Corinve couldn't let go of the question. What was behind that boundary? What were the humans hiding? Or worse, what had they discovered? When a human delegation finally extended an invitation, one that hadn't happened in over a century, Corin knew he had his chance. A single ship would be allowed to enter human space, to meet them face to face. The invitation was an honor, an opportunity, but also a warning. Everyone in the galaxy knew the risks. No one who crossed into human space had ever come back. Yet the curiosity, the burning need to know what lay behind that wall, was too much to ignore. So Corin accepted. As his ship crossed the invisible line into human space, the mood on board changed. The stars outside seemed darker, and the space itself felt heavier. The instruments on his ship flickered, and the calmness of the void felt wrong, as if something in the fabric of space itself was shifting. It was unsettling, and his crew could feel it too. No one said anything, but the tension was thick in the air. Then they received a message from the humans. The calmness of the voice from Earth was eerie. "Welcome to our space, Ambassador Corinve. We hope you enjoy your stay." The words were polite, too polite. Corin had met humans before, traders and diplomats who were bold and confident, sometimes arrogantly so. But this was different. There was something in the tone of their message that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Something in the voice, almost too calm, almost too controlled. He couldn't explain it, but deep inside he felt a sinking feeling. The humans knew something, and he was about to find out what. As Corin's ship slowly moved deeper into human space, his unease grew. The escort ship sent by the humans, which was guiding them to their destination, was sleek and unassuming. Yet there was something unsettling about it. It moved with a strange precision, like it was alive, every motion too smooth, too controlled. The crew couldn't take their eyes off it. They had all seen warships, transport ships, and diplomatic cruisers, but this was something else. Corin felt a presence on board that he couldn't shake. He wasn't alone in his discomfort. His crew, those skilled diplomats and seasoned veterans, shared the same silence, the same tension. No one spoke, but their expressions said it all. They were all on edge. The ship's sensors continued to flicker and buzz, unable to make sense of the space around them. It felt like they were no longer in the galaxy they knew, but somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and unknown. Finally, the voice of the human escort ship came through once more. "We are approaching Sol. Prepare for descent." The words were delivered with the same calm, almost mechanical tone as before. Something about the way they were spoken made the hairs on the back of Corin's neck stand up. There was no warmth in the voice, no emotion, just a flatness that felt wrong. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth, almost too smooth. The ship glided like it had been designed for this moment, every movement calculated, precise. As they passed through the clouds, the first thing Corin noticed was how different Earth looked from any home world he had ever seen. Unlike the pristine, controlled environments of other species, Earth was a strange mix of old and new, natural and artificial. Towering megastructures stretched high into the clouds, while vast forests and untamed wilderness remained untouched, as if the humans refused to let go of their past. It was breathtaking in its contradictions, but also unnerving. The planet was alive, not just with civilization, but with something deeper, something ancient. The feeling that they were being watched only grew stronger as they descended. The ship landed on a sleek platform, and Corin's crew disembarked in silence. The air felt heavier now, thick with strange, unfamiliar scents. Strange flora mixed with the unmistakable scent of metals and something else, something that Corin couldn't quite place. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, but there was no turning back now. A group of humans stood waiting for them at the base of the platform, their expressions unreadable. Unlike the extravagant robes and shiny armor worn by other species, these humans wore simple, practical uniforms, suggesting they were not concerned with appearance, but with something else entirely. Their leader, a woman with piercing gray eyes, stepped forward and addressed Corin in a voice that was calm and polite, yet carried an underlying authority. "Ambassador Vesh," she said, "welcome to Earth." Corin studied her carefully, searching for some sign of deception. Was she hiding something? Was this some sort of trap? But there was nothing in her expression to suggest either fear or arrogance, just calm certainty. It was almost as if she knew something he didn't, something that everyone else was afraid to ask. Corin took a moment before replying, his voice steady, but tinged with curiosity. "Thank you, Director Graves," he said, his gaze never leaving her eyes. "This is quite the place you have here." Director Graves nodded, unfazed by his scrutiny. "It's not like other planets," she said simply, almost as if explaining the obvious. "But that's what makes it special. Now, if you'll follow me, I'll show you the way." Corin felt a sharp chill run through him as he followed her, his crew trailing behind. There was something in her tone, something in the way she carried herself, that told him this was not going to be a typical diplomatic visit. There were no pleasantries, no tours of beautiful landscapes or tours through cities. Just a quiet, solemn walk through halls that felt strange. The architecture they passed through was not the typical jumble of metal and stone like most other species' designs. No, this was different. It was sleek, seamless, and unnaturally precise, as though every corner and every surface had been perfectly crafted. Corin couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The walls didn't feel like walls. They felt like they were alive, watching him with every step. They reached a large, unmarked door at the end of the hallway. Director Graves placed her hand on the panel beside it, and the door slid open, revealing a room that was dark except for a faint glow from a large window on the far side. Corin stepped forward cautiously, his heart beating louder in his chest as he approached the glass. It was then that he saw it. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart skipped a beat. What he saw below was so impossible, so incomprehensible, that his mind refused to accept it at first. There, below the glass, was a creature, or rather, something that might have been a creature, but not in any sense that he understood. It was huge, enormous, stretching across the chamber in a way that defied the laws of space. Its form was shifting, not quite solid, as if it were not fully contained by the rules of the universe itself. One moment it seemed like a mass of writhing tendrils. The next it hinted at something vaguely humanoid, its long, twisted limbs twitching in slow, deliberate motions. But what terrified Corin the most wasn't the shape or the size. It was the feeling that came with it. He could feel its attention on him, not with eyes, but with some other sense, something deep within his mind, something that seemed to pull at his very being. His instincts screamed at him to run, to escape, but his body wouldn't move. He was frozen, staring at something far beyond his understanding. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Director Graves' expression remained calm as she turned to face him. "That," she said softly, "is why no one crosses into human space." Corin's mind raced as he stared through the glass, his thoughts spinning out of control. The thing below them, it wasn't like any species he had ever encountered. It was beyond the comprehension of any scientist, philosopher, or even the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy. It was as if it were not meant to exist within the rules of the universe. His breath came in short bursts, and his twin hearts beat faster with a mix of fear and awe. Director Graves watched him closely, her gray eyes steady and unwavering. "I know it's difficult to understand," she said, her voice calm. "But that's exactly why no one is allowed beyond the borders of human space. The rest of the galaxy isn't ready for what we've found." Corin turned to her, his voice trembling with disbelief. "But how? How did you even find this thing? And why keep it a secret?" Graves' expression softened slightly, but there was no warmth in it, just an unyielding certainty. "We didn't find it, Ambassador. It found us, a long time ago." She paused, as if measuring the weight of her words before speaking again. "Humanity was the first to encounter it, the first to look into the void and hear it call. And once we heard it, once we knew it was out there, we couldn't unlearn that knowledge." Corin's gaze shifted back to the creature in the chamber below. His eyes widened, and the cold feeling of fear gripped him again. "What exactly is it?" Director Graves shook her head, her lips pressing together in a thin line. "It's not something that can be explained easily. Not with words, anyway. It's not a species, or a force, or even a god. She paused as if considering how much to say. It is. The space between things. It exists in the gaps. The places where no one should look. Corin swallowed hard, the realization slowly settling over him like a heavy weight. You're telling me that this thing is why humanity stopped exploring? Why you closed your borders? Yes, Graves replied quietly. Because once we knew it existed, once we understood the danger, we had to make a choice. We could keep exploring, keep expanding, and risk awakening something far worse than war. Or we could stop, and we chose to stop. Corin struggled to find his voice. His mind was still reeling from everything he had seen and heard. But you're containing it, right? You can keep it from getting out? Graves didn't answer immediately. She turned away from him, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if looking at something beyond the room. We're doing our best to keep it contained, but containment isn't permanent. Nothing is. It's only a matter of time before someone, some other species, gets curious. And when that happens, we won't be able to stop it. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Corin realized just how fragile the peace was in the galaxy. He had always thought that the biggest threat came from warships, weapons, and alien invasions. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't a war that could be fought with armies. It wasn't a threat that could be destroyed with bombs or guns. It was something much older, something that had existed long before the galaxy was born. A sudden noise behind him startled Corin. He turned quickly, only to find a new figure standing at the entrance to the chamber. The man was tall, with a rugged face that carried the weight of years spent in human space. His clothes were simple but practical, much like the ones worn by Graves and the others. But it was the way he stood, confident yet wary, that made Corin's heart skip a beat. "Director Graves," the man said with a deep, gravelly voice. "Ambassador Vesh, I see you've met John." He gestured toward the creature behind the glass, and Corin's stomach churned at the sound of the name. "John," Corin repeated, confused. The man nodded slowly, his expression grim. "That's what we call it. Or, that's what we've called it for centuries anyway. It's the only way we can talk about it without losing our minds." Graves glanced at the newcomer and gave him a curt nod. "This is Commander Elizabeth Reich. She's one of the few who have had direct contact with John. She'll be overseeing your stay on Earth, Ambassador." Corin studied Elizabeth with newfound interest. The way she spoke about John was so matter-of-fact, so cold, as if she had accepted its existence as part of life. There was no fear, no hesitation in her voice. It was as if she had become numb to the horrors that lurked just beneath the surface of the universe. But Corin could sense the subtle unease in her eyes, a hint of something deeper. This wasn't just about containment. This wasn't just about keeping John locked away. It was about survival. "I didn't know you had a name for it," Corin said, trying to wrap his mind around the situation. "Is it even a name that makes sense? Can anything make sense about it?" Elizabeth's eyes flickered with a shadow of something, maybe regret, maybe guilt, before she spoke. "We've tried to understand it, but the more we look, the less we know. We call it John because that's easier than saying the thing that could destroy everything. But it's not really a name. It's just what we've come to live with." There was a long pause. Corin could feel the tension in the room, like a storm about to break. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers. But part of him knew that the answers would only lead to more questions, questions that no one, not even the humans, had the strength to answer. "Can we leave now?" Corin finally asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Graves nodded without hesitation. "Yes, you'll see more of Earth. But I must warn you, Ambassador, there are some things you can't unsee, and some questions you're better off not asking." Corrin felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he had no choice but to follow. The truth was already too much to bear. And as he walked out of the room, Elizabeth and Graves flanking him, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Corrin's mind was still racing with the weight of everything he had learned. The creature, John, that the humans had discovered, and the terrifying truth they had uncovered about the space between things, was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The galaxy was full of mysteries, but nothing like this. The humans had been hiding it all for centuries, and now Corrin was one of the few who knew the truth. As they walked through the sleek corridors of the facility, Corrin tried to focus on the present, but his thoughts kept returning to the creature below the glass. It was alive, but not in any way that made sense. It was as if it were part of the universe itself, existing beyond space and time. How could something like that be contained? And for how long? They passed several rooms, each more sterile and unwelcoming than the last, until they reached a small, plain-looking door at the end of the hall. Graves motioned for Corrin to follow her inside. As he stepped into the room, he noticed a tall, thin man sitting at a console, his face illuminated by the soft glow of several holographic screens. His expression was intense, his eyes darting over the data in front of him with practiced precision. "This is Dr. Jarek Fenn," Graves introduced him. "He's been working with the containment team for decades. If there's anyone who knows how to keep John contained, it's him." Dr. Fenn looked up, his sharp features softening into a small smile as he acknowledged Corrin. "Ambassador," he said with a nod, "it's not every day we get a visitor from the Galactic Council. I imagine you've learned quite a bit already." Corrin hesitated before answering. "I've learned more than I ever expected," he said slowly. "But I'm not sure I understand any of it." Dr. Fenn chuckled softly, the sound almost hollow. "Understand? No one truly understands it, not even the humans who discovered it. We only know what it is not. It's not a threat we can fight with weapons, and it's not a force we can control with science. We can only contain it for as long as we can." The room grew quieter as Dr. Fenn's words sank in. Corrin felt the weight of the situation more deeply than ever before. This wasn't just about diplomacy or politics. This was about the survival of the galaxy itself, and humanity had become the unwilling keepers of something far more dangerous than anything anyone had imagined. Containment. "How?" Corrin asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Fenn's eyes darkened, and he shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "It's not something I can explain in a few words. The methods we use are unconventional, but they're the only way we've found to keep it from escaping." "Unconventional?" Corrin repeated, a growing sense of unease creeping up his spine. "What does that mean?" Graves stepped forward, her expression grim. "It means that the containment methods we use aren't exactly what the rest of the galaxy would consider acceptable, but they work, for now." Before Corrin could ask more, a voice interrupted the tense silence. The door slid open, and another figure stepped into the room. This time it was a woman, a tall, strong-looking woman in military gear, with a scar running down the side of her face. Her dark eyes scanned the room before landing on Corrin, and she gave him a small, respectful nod. "This is Captain Mara Joss," Graves said, her tone a little warmer than it had been before. "She's been in charge of security around the containment area for years." Captain Joss offered Corrin a brief smile. "Nice to meet you, Ambassador," she said. "I understand you've seen John." Corrin nodded, still unsettled by the memory of the creature. "I have," he said, his voice tight, "and I'm beginning to understand why no one ever talks about it." Joss's smile faded, and she glanced briefly at Graves and Dr. Fenn before speaking again. There's something you need to know, Ambassador. Something no one outside of Earth has been told. Corin's heart skipped a beat. What is it? There are more of them, Joss said, her voice low and serious. We've only contained one, but it's not the only one out there. And if they ever wake up? She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid, but Corin didn't need to hear more. The look in Joss's eyes told him everything. The horror, the fear, the realization that what they were facing wasn't just one entity, but something far larger and far more terrifying. We've been keeping this secret for a reason, Joss continued, her gaze steady. If the other empires knew about John, about what's really out there, they would want to send ships. They'd want to investigate, and that would be the end of all of us. Corin stood frozen for a moment, trying to wrap his mind around the enormity of the situation. There was something out there, something beyond the known universe, that the humans had discovered. And they were the only ones who knew the truth, but even they couldn't control it. What happens if the rest of the galaxy finds out? Corin asked quietly. Joss's expression hardened. They'll come, and when they do, they'll make the same mistake we did. They'll think they can handle it, that they can contain it. But they won't. They never will. Graves stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. The reason we stay silent, Ambassador, the reason we've kept this from the rest of the galaxy is because the truth is too dangerous. If humanity hadn't stopped, if we hadn't contained John, there would be nothing left of the galaxy to fight over. Nothing but an endless, empty void. Corin felt his pulse quicken. The stakes had never been higher. The rest of the galaxy had no idea what lay beyond the edge of human space. They didn't know the true danger. And as much as he wanted to warn them, Corin knew the truth. Some secrets were never meant to be uncovered. The room fell silent again as the weight of their words pressed down on him. Corin felt the pressure of their gaze, and for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. He had come here for answers, but what he had discovered was something he wasn't sure he could live with. As he left the room, Captain Joss followed him, her heavy footsteps echoing behind him. Ambassador, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. There's something you need to see, something that might help you understand. Corin turned to her, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? You'll see, she said simply. It's not just John you need to be worried about. Corin's heart raced as Captain Joss led him through a maze of narrow hallways and rooms deeper into the heart of the facility. The air felt different here, charged with something he couldn't quite put his finger on. It was as if the very walls of the place were alive with secrets. The further they went, the more uneasy he became, as if each step took him further into a world that wasn't meant for anyone outside the humans' inner circle. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall. Unlike the sleek, sterile doors that had been part of the rest of the facility, this one was old, rusted and worn, with scratches along the surface, as though it had been used for something far more than just keeping things secure. Captain Joss stopped in front of it and turned to Corin, her face hard but with an unreadable expression. Before we go in, she said quietly, you need to understand something. What you're about to see, it's not just about John. It's about everything. It's the reason the galaxy doesn't know. It's why we've done everything we can to keep the truth hidden. Corin's mind spun as he nodded. He had learned a lot already, but the more he knew, the less sense it seemed to make. John, the entity that was contained beneath Earth, was just the beginning. Captain Joss had hinted that there was something worse, something more dangerous, that humanity had been trying to stop from escaping. Joss gave a short nod and activated the door. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room with walls lined with screens and strange equipment that Corin couldn't even begin to understand. But it wasn't the room itself that caught his attention. It was the figure standing in the middle of it. A tall man, standing with his back to them, was hunched over a set of monitors, fingers flying over the controls with practiced speed. He wore a long coat, dark as the shadows in the room, and his hair was wild, as if he hadn't seen a comb in weeks. But it was his eyes, pale and intense, that gave him an unsettling presence. He turned as they entered, his gaze locking onto Corrin with a cold, calculating look. "Ah, the ambassador," the man said with a slight smirk, though his voice was dry and sharp. "Corrinve, right? Don't look so surprised. We've been expecting you." Corrin blinked, thrown off by the suddenness of the introduction. "And you are?" "Dr. Elias Varen," the man replied, his voice still laced with an unsettling calm. "I'm the one who deals with things like John, and the things far worse than it." Captain Joss stepped into the room beside Corrin. "Elias has been working in the containment field for years. His expertise goes beyond what most people even know is possible." She gave the doctor a pointed look. "He's also the one who made the original discovery." Corrin raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "You found John?" Dr. Varen didn't seem impressed by the question. Instead, he gestured to one of the screens behind him. "I didn't just find John, Ambassador. I found the entire network, the system that keeps the balance between what is and what shouldn't be. Humans aren't just the keepers of John. We're the gatekeepers of something much more significant, something that could break the galaxy apart if it ever escapes." Corrin stepped forward, drawn by the gravity of Varen's words. "What are you saying? That John is just one part of this system?" Varen's expression darkened. "Exactly. John is the first of many. Each one of these creatures, they represent something beyond our understanding. They exist between the cracks of reality, between worlds and dimensions, beyond anything the galaxy has ever encountered. And they were all here, long before us." A cold shiver ran down Corrin's spine. The universe was full of mysteries, but this was something different. He had always thought of space as vast but ordered, a place governed by the rules of physics and time. But now, everything he thought he knew was being shattered. "So," Corrin began slowly, trying to process the enormity of it all, "if there are more of these things, what happens if one of them breaks free? What would happen to the galaxy?" Dr. Varen's lips curled into a twisted smile, but there was no humor in it. "You think John is dangerous? John is tame compared to the others. There's something much more powerful, much more ancient, lying just beyond the edges of human space. If that thing ever wakes up, the rest of the galaxy won't even know what hit it. It will be like waking the universe's darkest nightmare." Corrin stood frozen for a moment, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. "And you've been keeping this secret? All of this? Hidden from the rest of the galaxy?" Varen didn't answer right away. He looked at the screens for a moment, deep in thought, before speaking again. "We have no choice. If the galaxy knew about this, if they knew what we were dealing with, they would come. They would send ships, scientists, and soldiers. They would invade, trying to unlock what we've locked away. But the truth is, no one can control these things, not even humanity. And if they get out—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Corrin didn't need him to. He could already imagine the chaos that would ensue. If the other species in the galaxy learned what was really out there, they would stop at nothing to get to it. They would try to harness it, control it, and use it for their own purposes. But Corrin knew now, as doctor, Varen's words sank in, that no one could control what they had found, not even the humans. And if the rest of the galaxy discovered the truth too late, it would be catastrophic. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with all of this," Corrin said, his voice low. "What do you expect from me?" Dr. Varen gave him a long, hard look. "We don't expect anything, Ambassador. We're already beyond the point where anyone can change what's coming. We just want you to understand the stakes, and to know that the rest of the galaxy doesn't have the faintest clue what's waiting for them out there." Before Corin could respond, the door to the room opened again. A woman entered, her face masked in shadows, but there was something about her that immediately drew Corin's attention. She moved with a fluid, graceful confidence, her presence undeniable. She was tall, with short black hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. "This is Lyra," Joss said, a note of respect in her voice. "She's part of the team working with the containment protocol. Lyra, this is Ambassador Corinve." Lyra's gaze briefly swept over Corin before she nodded. "I understand you're here to learn the truth," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lies." Corin blinked, intrigued by the cryptic tone in her voice. "What do you mean?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to one of the monitors, tapping it to bring up a series of complex, glowing charts. "I mean that everything we've told you so far is just the beginning. What you've seen, it's just the surface. There's far more out there. And the worst part is that we don't even know what we've unleashed." Corin felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. Everything had changed in an instant. This was no longer just about diplomacy. It wasn't about the Galactic Council or any of the other species in the galaxy. It was about survival. And now Corin realized that the survival of the galaxy might depend on keeping the truth hidden. But as he stood in the presence of these people, these humans, he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was on the brink of something much darker, something no one had ever expected. And no matter what the humans did, no matter how hard they tried to contain it, the truth was slowly slipping out. Corin's thoughts were a whirlwind as he absorbed the weight of Lyra's words. The truth was slipping out, and the more he learned, the more the universe seemed to close in around him. These creatures, these ancient, unknowable forces, were beyond anything the galaxy had ever faced. He was standing at the edge of something far larger than he could understand, and the worst part was he couldn't see a way to stop it. Lyra's eyes lingered on him for a moment before she spoke again, her voice steady, but tinged with something darker. "You think you've learned all there is to know, Ambassador, but you haven't. There's a reason we keep the rest of the galaxy in the dark. If they knew, if they understood what we're dealing with—" She trailed off, and Corin's gut tightened as he realized just how precarious the situation was. The galaxy was full of powerful species, each one driven by their own ambitions and thirst for knowledge. If they ever found out the truth about what lay beyond human space, they wouldn't hesitate to try and control it, study it, or exploit it, but they would never be able to control it. "The galaxy has no idea how close they are to destruction," Lyra continued. "We've kept John contained, but it's only a matter of time before something else breaks free. Something much worse, and when it happens, there won't be anyone left to stop it." Corin swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure. "So what now? What are we supposed to do? Just keep hiding it?" "We've done what we can," Joss interjected, her tone grim. "But we can't stop what's coming, and we can't keep the galaxy in the dark forever. Someone has to know, even if they aren't ready for it." Corin felt the heavy weight of responsibility press down on him. He had come here seeking answers, but now he found himself standing on the precipice of something he could never unlearn. There was no simple solution, no easy fix. The universe was too vast, and the secrets buried in human space were far too dangerous to remain hidden forever. "I never thought the universe was this," Corin started, his voice shaky. "This dark?" "It is," Lyra said softly. "But there are things out there that are darker, things that never should have been uncovered." As Corrin prepared to leave the facility, his mind spinning with the horrific truths he had learned, Dr. Varen's voice echoed in his head. There's something much more powerful, much more ancient, lying just beyond the edges of human space. If that thing ever wakes up, the rest of the galaxy won't even know what hit it. The journey back to his ship was quiet, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on him. He couldn't shake the images of John and the other creatures, beings that existed in the spaces between dimensions, waiting for the right moment to escape. The idea that humanity, the very species that had clawed its way to the stars, was holding the line against these forces felt both tragic and terrifying. They were not protectors. They were prisoners, too. His ship hummed quietly as it lifted off from Earth's surface, the vast expanse of space stretching out before him. The familiar stars, the galaxies, the planets, all of it felt so distant now. His mind kept drifting back to the question that had driven him here in the first place. Why had humanity stopped? Why had they drawn that line and refused to cross it? He now understood the answer, but it was a truth he would never be able to share. The galaxy wasn't ready for it, and if Corrin spoke, they would demand answers, send ships, and wake something that was better left undisturbed. As he sat in the command chair, staring out at the stars, the soft beep of a transmission interrupted his thoughts. It was from the Galactic Council. "Ambassador Corrin, the message began. The Council has received your report regarding human isolation. There are many questions still left unanswered, and the Council demands further information. Your findings are critical to our next steps." Corrin sighed deeply. He had done what he could, but now the galaxy was pushing forward, unaware of the dangers that lay beyond the human boundary. He could already feel the pressure building, the weight of the Council's demands. They would not stop until they understood what lay in human space. And when they did, the worst would come. With a heavy heart, Corrin turned off the transmission. He knew what he had to do. The Council would push. They would send ships, scientists, and warships, all of them eager to unlock the secrets of human space. And when they did, the nightmare would begin. But Corrin also knew there was nothing more he could do. The galaxy was too curious, too hungry for knowledge. They would never understand the price of that curiosity until it was too late. He looked out the viewport at the vast blackness of space, the stars twinkling softly. And in the silence, as he drifted farther away from Earth, a quiet whisper echoed in his mind. The same one he had heard back in the depths of human space. "We see you." Corrin shuddered. He had felt it then, and he felt it now. He wasn't alone out here. None of them were. As his ship accelerated toward the Council station, Corrin knew one thing for certain. The universe had more questions than answers, and some of those answers were better left hidden. He hoped the galaxy would never find out what lay beyond human space. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before someone crossed that line. And when they did, they would understand the price of knowledge.